Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in to River City Waves. I'm Kenny and I'm glad that you're joining us today. We're having conversations about some of life's important questions and today is no exception. We're kicking off part 2 to our Easter themed podcast that we've had. If you didn't check out our last one that dropped, be sure to do that, where we kind of did an unpack on the topic of Lent, so you'll want to check that one out. But if you did hear that and you're diving in this time for part 2, we're glad to have you here. We are talking about the cross, the power of the cross, the significance of the cross, and the impact that Jesus sacrificing his life on the cross has on us as Christians, on our faith, how it informs how we view the world, and so much more. Today's a really great deep dive into a topic surrounding Easter and Jesus on the cross. Really hope that you enjoy this, and if you do us a favor. Rate, review, share this content on whatever platforms you're consuming it on. It would be so grateful, we'd be grateful to have you share that information and get that out to others. So without any further ado, I want to introduce for part 2 on Easter, Pastors Robby and Xander. Hope you enjoy.
Well, hey everybody. We're leading up to the season of Easter. It's Lent right now as you're taking this in. And today we want to focus a little bit on the cross, because the cross is such a unique part of the Christian faith. It's one of the things that makes Christianity really different from other religions in the world. And we're just going to be exploring today how it is that the cross is unique and how it is that the cross is central to the Christian faith in so many ways. Without the cross, we wouldn't have Christianity. Jesus, he would have been a great teacher, but it's the cross that sets him apart. And the cross is really the central power of the gospel. So we're going to explore that a little bit. I've got with me today Xander Bradford.
Hi.
He's just going to be getting into this discussion.
Yeah.
Xander, you got any plans for spring?
Oh, man. In spring, well, when does spring end? The middle of May, end of May, something like that?
June 21st. Spring
June 21st.
ends.
Wow. So, yeah, spring, going to a few weddings. My friends are getting married. That's exciting.
Yeah.
I'll be going back to Springfield, Missouri to walk at my graduation.
Super.
So that'll be great. Be celebrating your birthday.
Oh, yeah.
That's
exciting. May
exciting.
16th.
Yeah.
A lot of good birthdays happen in May.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, let's jump into it.
Sure. So, I thought a good starting point before we talk about where we'll spend the most of the podcast talking about how Christianity is different from other faiths with the cross as the focal point. I'm just wondering, what are some things that ties together the major faith of the world? What are some unique things we all share?
Okay, so all the faiths of the world, all the religious systems of the world, let's say, there are 5.
Okay.
There's that are the largest and that encompass the greatest number of people. So there's Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. These are the 5 major world religions that most of the world, most of the people in the world claim in some way. And all of them, except for Buddhism, acknowledge the presence of the divine. And in Buddhism, they might talk about transcendence more. They're kind of not sure if there's a God, and some Buddhists are atheists, but they think that Buddha gave them great keys to life, whatever. But pretty much, we all agree in transcendence. And some people have, taken quite a number of people actually. They've taken the Christian faith in the phenomenon of religion in the world, and they've said, all these religions are saying the same thing. In fact, I heard it just the other day. Rob Reiner, the famous movie director and producer and star, he is a secular Jew, but I heard him in an interview say that, all the religions believe the same thing, that we should love each other, and that is somewhat true, but really not true. There's some distinct differences here. So, for example, in Islam, they say Jesus didn't die on the cross, that there was someone else there who was dying in his place. And there are different opinions about what that cross means, that across all these different faiths. Of course, for Christians, it is the central event.
Yeah. And what we just also begin by understanding, how is the cross the central event? I think we often think of the resurrection as a thing which gives us life and gives us hope. So how important is the cross, and why is it so important?
Yeah. Well, the cross is the event that breaks the power of sin and death and Satan.
Yeah.
In the world. And so this is when the price is paid for sin on the cross. It is the event that is most foreshadowed in the Old Testament. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of sacrifices in the Old Testament. There's stories where that sacrifice is central to the meaning of the story, and all these things seem to point to or foreshadow the cross itself. The cross is also the way that we are told in the New Testament that we identify with Jesus, that the cross is basically, that's our doorway into the kingdom of God and the Christian life. Mm-hmm. And the resurrection doesn't, it kind of completes the story. The resurrection has many different kinds, many different shades of meaning and implications, but it does not. It doesn't have the same weight of influence that the cross does on the whole story of the Bible and in the meaning of the Christian faith.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, one thing you mentioned is that the New Testament's full of teachings that we can identify with the cross in different ways. If you guys listened to our last episode, we talked about Lent, which is a way that we prepare ourselves to identify with the crucifixion of Jesus. But what are some other ways that we can identify with the cross?
So, I think you're asking me how. What are you asking me there? I'm trying.
Sure. What I'm asking is, how can we identify with the death of Jesus that's signified by the cross, and how can we take that as part of our identity? Yeah.
So part of what's involved here is that when we come to faith in the first place, mm-hmm. we are saying basically, Lord, nothing else matters except for you. I'm going to turn my back on the whole world, and I'm going to identify with you in your death so that you can live through me. Mm-hmm. That's what Galatians chapter 2 talks about. Paul writes that it's by faith that he has life in the Son of God, and this comes by identifying with him and dying with him. And that is one way that we identify with the cross. Another way that we identify with the cross as believers is through baptism. When we're baptized, we come to faith and then we're baptized. Baptism is being immersed in the death of that came to Jesus on the cross, mm-hmm. and being raised to new life. So we're identifying with him. Those are some of the things that I think of when I think about identifying with the cross. What kinds of things do you think of?
Well, man, just there's a good list. But just to add one, I think of also communion.
Yeah.
Paul writes that it's through communion that we participate in the death of Christ, and so that's a big way. And then I also think of the daily struggle and the daily ways that we die to the world, and we die to sin. We pick up our cross as Jesus instructs us, and there's some pain, some suffering that comes along with it, but we know that the reward of eternal life is on the other end.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, certainly. Those are great examples.
yeah.
One of the things that I think of when I think about the uniqueness of the cross, in terms of our faith, it's like, for one, we don't really remember anyone else who was crucified. Being crucified was such an embarrassing,
It's a shameful
thing that and it's not something that anyone would remember or celebrate. But this becomes something that is central to our celebration in our faith. And furthermore, that Jesus is remembered in this way, that he was crucified by the Roman authorities. It's not that's not a recipe you'd come up with if you wanted anyone to remember you, or so that 2,000 years after your death, there'd be billions of people around the world who prayed to you and worshiped you and did all kinds of good things around the world because of you. Crucifixion wouldn't have been on anyone's list.
Yeah, absolutely. I think of also Jesus was crucified up on a hill so that people could see, that the King of the Jews is the sign they put above his head on the cross red, and they crowned him with the thorns. They were trying to mock him and embarrass him. Other people who were crucified, they set up the crosses along the streets to try to dissuade criminals from acting in criminal ways. And so, it sort of had the total opposite impact of what was planned. And then I especially think of the fact that, I can't think of another religion where God goes through any embarrassment like that, let alone an embarrassment to death, to the end of death.
Yeah, Jesus is the only one of the figures who founded these religions, who dies at an early age, naked, executed as a criminal. That's not the story for any other religious leader in history.
Yeah. Well, not successful ones.
Muhammad is someone who conquered his enemies with military force, and the others, they're quite old and advanced in age when they die, and they're surrounded by the people who love them. Jesus surrounded by his enemies. Yeah, there are a couple of onlookers who, like his mother and John, we're told John the Apostle's there, and a couple others. That's it.
Yeah.
And he dies in this way, and yet this becomes an inspiration. It seems to me interesting also that the cross is something that people on coming at it from all kinds of vantage points find meaningful. So what I'm thinking about here is that, for example, you might imagine that the Christian faith would have been rejected by African slaves who were brought to America, or Christianity would have just been, they might have stuck with their tribal religions. But I think part of the reason why that became so important among the slaves and then later in the African American community is because, central to our faith is someone who's persecuted, someone who has everything taken from him by people who already have all the money and the power, and they find hope in him in a way that no other story draws people together who are afflicted by evil. I think also that Jesus and his death is also something that very directly challenges anyone who has privileges, because they find themselves not wanting to be on the side of the oppressors and those that killed Jesus. And they find themselves somehow drawn to the idea that there was love in this sacrifice, and they don't want to be a part of making that happen more or further. I think it's so interesting also that, I think this is the reason why the early church and in the church today was filled with such a dramatic spectrum of people. So, in that early church, you would have found a good portion of the early church were slaves, and they were worshiping alongside sometimes their masters. But beyond that, we find people from all kinds of different ethnicities who come together and worship, and who find a central unifying reality in the cross, and it is so powerful that it makes people who were across all these different places in the socioeconomic and the ethnic and spectrum, that it made them to feel like it makes them brothers and sisters. The shadow of the cross, or the light of the cross, depending on how you look at it, it ends up being something that for one makes all of us recognize our need, but also it challenges us basically from any vantage point that we're looking at it from. And it humbles us, or it makes us ashamed. This is all part of the uniqueness of the cross of Jesus and the power of the cross of Jesus.
Absolutely. Yeah, it puts us all on equal footing. We're
Absolutely,
all in
yeah.
need
Right.
of Jesus.
Yeah.
Another thing I think of about the uniqueness of the cross is the example of love that it provides for us. You mentioned at the top of our conversation about how all major religions purport to say the best way to love each other, and that we need to love one another. But what the Bible tells us is that we know what perfect love is because of what Jesus did on the cross.
That's good. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's a major uniqueness about the cross. It's more than just an example for us, but that's a big element of it, I think.
Absolutely. Excuse me. And not only that, but the cross inspires great sacrifice among those that put their faith in Jesus. Some of the most interesting things that happened, particularly in the ancient world and particularly in the Roman Empire, is that when people would become Christians, often some of the wealthiest people who became believers, they would end up giving away everything they had. And this happened in a number of places in the ancient world. For instance, in Turkey, in Constantinople, there was a woman of incredible wealth and incredible estate. She becomes a Christian, and she has her whole place basically turned into kind of a functional hospital, a place for feeding people, an enormous commune in that part of the world, so that it was said that, while she lived, there was no one who had material need.
Wow.
In the whole city. And the only way you get there to that kind of sacrifice is that it's not that you recognize this life doesn't have any meaning. It's when you recognize a debt I could never pay for myself.
Yeah.
Someone else paid. And so I'm going to give everything I have away and to others as a sacrifice for him. That's extraordinary.
Yeah, wow. That's really big. The other thing that I think of is the cross can be it gives people courage to defend, to believe and stand up for the gospel, even to the fate of death. We hear about the first martyr, Stephen, who even while he was dying, he did not take back his testimony. He continued to pray for the people who were killing him because of the courage that the cross gave him. And even still to this day, we can hear stories of people in other parts of the world who are being killed for their faith. But because of the cross, they're able to stay courageous, knowing that death is defeated and that it's not the final say for their lives.
Yeah. Boy, that's really great insight, Xander, in that the certainly the testimony of the early martyrs is that there's in many ways nothing like it. So, people who might have easily recanted something else, they found it somehow deeply compelling because the cross was at the center of their faith to lay down their life for Jesus.
Yeah.
Also, it's the cross is at the center of why, for example, the gladiatorial games died in the ancient world. It's because death and the importance of every person started to take on a whole new meaning in light of the cross that people had come to believe in. And it's also at the heart of why Christians would, when plagues began to strike the Roman Empire, particularly late in the Roman Empire, plagues would strike a city, and the pagans would run away from the city. They would run into the country as far as they could get from the plague. And it was the Christians that stayed behind. It was Christians who cared for the sick and the dying, and they insisted on giving respectful burials to those who died. And part of that was because they weren't afraid of dying.
Yeah.
But also they recognized that Jesus was he laid down his life for them, and so they would risk their life for love for others. I just think there is no other story like the Christian faith in the history of the world, and certainly of religious ideas, and nothing else has changed and reformed the world in quite the same ways, and in the speed that the Christian faith has.
Yeah. Along with that, I think of William Wilberforce, the man who in England was led the abolition movement for slavery, and he was inspired by his Christian faith, by his recognition of the cross to do that. There's just countless stories. Question I have is, in America today, where I think most of our listeners probably live, because that's where our church is, there's not much persecution. There's not much. Our culture accepts our faith. What are some ways that we can be inspired by the cross to stand bold in our lives? What would that look like for us?
Well, I think that it means that there should never be any situation where we would fear the rejection of other people based on our faith. I don't know that our culture accepts it. They do tolerate
Right.
the practice of our faith, but that's part of it. And I'd say also that we recognize when we're asked by people like, what is it that we believe in? This is a line for us to go down, and this is something for us not to give up on, because this is the thing about the story of the cross too, is that this is not a story where God just overwhelms people with power.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, God overwhelms the powers of the world and of evil, of death, of sin, with weakness and with loss.
Yeah.
And that's got to be at the core of what we're focused on. And it's why the cross has the compelling power that it does for us and holds the place that it does in our faith.
Absolutely.
Well, man, I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Hey, me
today.
too. That was fun.
We will look forward to seeing you, hopefully sometime soon. Comment, share, review this podcast. We'll be coming at you soon again.